December 19, 1941, Alexandria Harbor, Egypt. The sea is black glass under a moon, smothered by winter cloud. Harbor buoys blink like tired eyes, and beyond them the silhouettes of pride and power. HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Valiant lie moored in quiet confidence. You hear it before you see it. The tiny hiss of oxygen, the muted thrum of a motor no louder than a cat's purr, the slow exhale of two men balancing fear and discipline beneath the skin of the water. A few cables off the breakwater, the Italian submarine Scirè has come as close to the enemy's front door as any captain dares. In the shadowed control room, Commander Junio Valerio Borghese watches the minute hand crawl. It took days of stealth to reach this position, hours of submerged patience to wait for the right tide and patrol pattern. Now he whispers "Buona fortuna" as the forward hatch opens and the sea folds over the men and their machines. They are Decima Flottiglia MAS, the 10th, a small fraternity of specialists whose weapon is a torpedo ridden like a horse. The Italians call it the SLC, Siluro e Lenta Corsa, the slow-running torpedo. Everyone else calls it the maialo, the pig, because it fights you every inch. Each one is a stubby dark cylinder with a detachable warhead, roughly 230 kilograms of high explosive, shaped to fit like a malignant growth at the nose. Twin riders straddle the chassis in heavy rubberized suits, their faces hidden by neoprene hoods and goggles, their lungs tethered to Pirelli ARO oxygen rebreathers that produce no betraying bubbles. They look like shadows riding a shadow. Luigi Durand della Penne and his second, Emilio Bianchi, guide Maiale 221 into the near-silent chop beyond the Western Harbor entrance. 50 yards to port, the second team, Antonio Marseglia and Spartaco Shergat, eases their machine forward for Queen Elizabeth. Farther off, Vincenzo Martellotta and Mario Marino angle toward the tanker anchorage. Above them all, searchlights rake the sky, nervous for Stukas that will never come tonight. Below, darkness swallows motion whole. Keep her nose down. De la Penne murmurs, voice muffled inside his hood, gloved hands feathering the depth lever. The compass card glows a weak green. Alexandria's outer defenses bristle with anti-torpedo nets and booms, patrol craft, and watchful sentries. But human attention is a surface thing. You sink to 5 meters. You vanish into a world of pressure and heartbeat. The first obstacle is a net, heavy with weed, sagging between iron posts like a drowned curtain. The men slow, feeling the Maial bunch and yaw. It wants to climb. It always wants to climb. Bianchi eases forward with a lanyard and soft metal clamp, fixing a small line and pulley to the net's webbing. Steady hands, steady lungs. He works by touch, the cold biting through even the layered rubber. Minutes pass like hours. Above, a patrol launch coughs diesel, and a bored sailor flicks a cigarette into the water. The ember falls and dies inches from Bianchi's shoulder as he and the line sink away together. They wriggle under, the SLC scraping softly against the loaded mesh, a sound as loud as thunder to men whose lives depend on silence. Then they are through, barely, and the harbor opens like a black cathedral. Ahead, the dim lozenges of battleships grow larger, flat water around them broken by the quiet ring of a sentry's footfall and the occasional clink of metal on metal. Queen Elizabeth sits deeper and broader. Valiant rests near the inner mole, her hull a looming cliff in the gloom. Every surface smells faintly, even underwater, of oil and paint and power. De la Penne feels it in his fingertips when they touch the battleship's world. Steel plated over steel, chilled by winter brine. The Maial shivers as the motor lugs, then steadies. He should be thinking about the clock, oxygen consumption, patrol cycles, the window before dawn. But instead, his mind flashes back to the pool at La Spezia, where they practiced this 100 times under the bark of instructors and the indifferent stare of engineers who doubted you could ever ride a torpedo through a guarded harbor and live. Human torpedoes? The skeptics had laughed. A carnival trick. You hear the laughter again when the hull rises over you like a midnight mountain. Here, Bianchi taps, indicating a ribline under the Valiant's boilers by feel and estimation. They are trained to hunt for the ship's vulnerable belly, to place the charge where chain reaction and confined spaces will magnify the blast. The warhead coupling resists. Frozen threads grit in the seam, the pig being a pig. De La Penne's wrists ache as he torques the locking ring. He can feel each second nibbling at their oxygen margin. He remembers the plan as a sequence of breaths. Approach, attach, set the hydrostatic fuse, escape to the rendezvous point, wait for dawn internment if captured, and pray the timers are faithful. A light stutters above, metal boots, maybe voices, and both men freeze, bodies pressed against the curve of armor plate. The sound passes. In the watery hush, you become terrified of your own heart. It seems impossible that a sentry couldn't hear it, that the ship herself couldn't feel you tapping at her nerves. Almost. Bianchi mouths, goggles flashing a crescent of reflected starlight. Together, they lever the warhead from the maiale's nose, cradling it like an ugly infant, and manhandle its weight to the underside of the battleship. Magnets thump home on the first try, a small miracle, and the charge hangs obediently against Her Majesty's steel. De La Penne twists the timer cap with a cableman's caution. The hydrostatic pistol is set to arm at depth, the clockwork to wake hours later. He cannot help glancing upward, as if he could see through hull and decks and mess tables to the captain's cabin, to the neat logbook that will soon break off mid-sentence. Somewhere up there, a kettle hisses. Somewhere, a young stoker laughs at a joke he has told 100 times, because routine is the only defense against fear. The Mayal trembles again. Battery strain, motor heat, a tired animal begging to be turned for home. Vi, De La Penne signals, go. They back away into the blackness, the battleship's shadow falling off their shoulders like a cloak. Across the anchorage, a soft scrape in the dark suggests another team touching iron, another set of hands feeling for a queen's ribs in the blind. You might think the sea is empty at night. It isn't. It is full of the things you bring into it. Resolve, doubt, the echo of a captain's buona fortuna, and the metronome of a clock that now, at last, has begun to tick. Inside the harbor, time compresses to the width of a wristwatch crystal. The Mayale's needle trembles over its tiny dial as Luigi Durand de la Penne and Emilio Bianchi edge away from Valiant's shadow, trying to nurse a fickle battery through one last crawl to safety. The water is colder now, or perhaps it's the body remembering what it ignored during the work. Their rebreathers taste metallic. Each breath is a calculation. Each inch of throttle is a risk. A cone of light blooms ahead, slow and pale. It isn't the hard slash of a searchlight. It's a lantern halo spilling through the water. Someone on a launch checking a mooring line, perhaps. The Italians drift, letting the Mayal sink half a meter, passing in the lamplight's outer penumbra like a rumor. De La Penne thinks of the timer ticking under the battleship's boilers, of the magnetic clamps biting steel. He pictures cogs turning in a sealed clock, a patient animal on a leash, tugging toward an hour no one above has imagined yet. They never see the next danger, they feel it. The Mayal shudders, yaw quivering, and then refuses to answer the lever. A cable has looped across the chassis, some trailing harbor line, invisible in the murk, snagging the torpedo's fairing near the tail. Bianchi is off his saddle in a heartbeat, hands working blind. He frees the loop, but the second stolen cannot be repaid. The motor coughs, surges, dies. He and De La Penne share the same thought with no need of words. The pig will not carry them out. There is a contingency against failure, drilled at La Spezia until it became a reflex. Abandon the SLC, swim for the rendezvous point, exfiltrate if luck allows, or accept capture. They swing off together, letting the dead weight sink. De La Penne makes a last glance over his shoulder at the battleship, an outline in negative light, and then kicks toward the inner mole. They are almost clear when the night itself barks. Halt! Who goes there? Boots thud above. A beam slashes the water's skin and rakes back. A long pole clatters against the stone and then plunges, probing. Bianchi presses his palms against the wall, flat as paint. De La Penne sinks, letting his body ride the pressure below the surface where light becomes a rumor. The beam passes once, twice. A hook scrapes stone, drags along rubber. It catches. Hands drag them up, coughing brine. On deck, torches wash over black suits and blank goggles. Bayonets glint. A petty officer swears. No one is quite sure what they are looking at. A sentry pokes at the rebreather's corrugated hose and flinches as if it might bite. The Italians say nothing. Their decomp lungs ache as they cough the harbor from their throats. Rope bites their wrists. A launch engine kicks. The boat noses around, heading for a ladder lit by hooded lamps. On the way in, De la Penne sees, just for a breath, the next team, a smear of darker dark slipping under Queen Elizabeth's turn of the bilge. Antonio Marsiglia and Spartaco Scirè, if the plan holds, riding their own stubborn pig to an appointment with history. His heart rises and sinks in the same beat. If they succeed, 3 detonations will divide the morning, one under each battleship, one under a tanker or destroyer, anywhere the harbor's nerves are thinnest. Below another buoy line, Vincenzo Martellotta and Mario Marino nose their SLC toward a fat silhouette with a snout of hoses and booms. A fleet oiler riding the night, Sagona, moored with a destroyer's hull pressed alongside. Fuel, fire, a chain reaction begging for a spark. If they can plant their charge there, the blast wave will not care about uniforms. De la Penne and Bianchi are hustled up an accommodation ladder and onto steel, wet boots ticking like clock hands on a deck grating. The British voices resolve into orders. Get them below. Captain will want to look at this circus. A bosun's whistle shrieks. Somewhere, maybe out of habit, a Marine laughs, short, uncertain, and the sound dies in the wind. In a stark-lit compartment, the goggles come off. Faces are revealed, hollow-cheeked, salt-burnt, eyes steady. Names are asked for. There are rules for this too. Rank, name, number. Nothing more. De la Penne sticks to it. He is calm in a way that confuses the officers looking at him. Calm men in captured rubber do not fit any training pamphlet. Bianchi winces as a corpsman checks his shoulder, strained in the struggle under the net. "Where did you come from?" asks an officer with lieutenant's lace. "What were you doing under our ship?" The questions climb in rank as the minutes pass. They are led down, then across, then down again, through a honeycomb of compartments that smell of oil and green paint, of brass polish and tobacco and confidence. At last, they are put in a compartment low in the hull, near the turn of metal that curves toward the sea. The door claps shut, bolts sing into their keepers. For a long moment, there is only the ship's breath, the purr of auxiliary pumps, the click of a valve, the scuff of a boot overhead. Bianchi leans his head back against cold steel. De la Penne listens to the ship as if it were a living thing, as if he could hear the charge he laid now humming like a wasp in its jar. He cannot. He must trust the work of his hands and the stubborn heart of the Mael. He would not curse, even now. Footsteps return. A senior officer steps into the light, a captain by bearing, if not by braid alone, flanked by Marines. He studies the 2 divers as one might study artifacts hauled up from a ruin. "You will tell me what you have done," he says, more statement than question. De la Penne's reply is not rehearsed. It is simply the only honorable one he knows. "There is a charge under your ship," he says evenly. "It is set." He does not say where. He does not say when. "You may wish to take precautions topside." For a beat, nobody speaks. The ship hums, composed. The captain's jaw tightens a fraction. He is not a man to panic. He is also not a fool. Orders ripple outward from him like pressure waves. Watertight doors checked, damage control parties confirmed, boats readied. But you cannot tow a harbor out from under a battleship at anchor. You cannot lift a queen by hand. Somewhere else in the anchorage, a motorized launch nosed past the oiler Sagona. Below, Martellotta and Marino finish their work with the slow devotion of locksmiths. The warhead finds steel. Magnets thud. A gloved finger twists a timer. 2 men turn away into the dark. Across the roadstead, Marsiglia and Scirè slip under another mountain of armor and feel their own timer begin to count its secret mathematics. In the holding compartment, the minutes thicken like syrup. De la Penne checks the time not with a watch, his is long gone, but with memory and breath. Bianchi counts his inhalations in groups of 50, the way they taught him when oxygen gets tight and margins disappear. Above, a boatswain calls the hour. It is nearing dawn. A faint grayness seeps down the vents, the world rediscovering color after hours of charcoal. The captain returns. His eyes measure these men again. "If you know when," he begins, and leaves the rest unsaid. De la Penne's gaze drops. He will not betray his friends in the roadstead, but he is not indifferent to the lives above him. In a voice that carries, he says only, "Soon." Across Alexandria, gulls begin their insolent morning arguments. A baker somewhere slams an oven door. A Marine who was a farm boy before he became a sentry yawns and thinks about coffee. And then, deep in the water under a battleship's belly, a spring slips past a tooth on a gear. Dawn creeps into Alexandria on the soles of quiet feet. First, a gray wash across the harbor, then a line of pale light catching on rigging and boot buckles. On the wet stones of the mole, men yawn, coffee steams. A bosun's call trills somewhere near the destroyer flotilla, sharp enough to cut sleep from the eyes of even the most stubborn sailor. On the big ships, reveille begins to turn routine like a crank. Valves are checked, mess decks stirred, signal halyards tautened. The sea is almost kind. Then the harbor lifts. It begins low, too low for sound, more a pressure that makes the lungs forget how to do their work. Under HMS Valiant's armored bulk, the charge planted against her ribs wakes with a crack, like the world being folded. The shockwave climbs through steel, finds the path of least resistance, hurls itself into voids and ducts and thin places. Deck plates belly, light fittings pop, tinkling down a chain of compartments. In the holding space where two Italians wait, the floor heaves as if the ship has drawn a convulsive breath. A beat later, water, black, cold, irresistible, bursts inward where seams were never meant to be tested this way. It comes through a rent that wasn't there a second earlier, a ragged mouth of steel inward curled. The first man to see it doesn't shout. He only runs because running is the only answer when the sea walks into your house. Damage control parties are already moving, hoses under arms, oak wedges at the ready, lamps glaring. The captain's orders, low and terse, snap across sound-powered lines. Close up at your stations, report frames and flooding. Watertight doors slam in a metal fugue, the ship compartmentalizing its fear. On the oiler Sagona, still snug to the quay with destroyer HMS Jervis pressed alongside to load fuel, the dawn takes on a different color. Down below, Martellotta and Marino's charge chooses its moment. A white flash blooms midships. Then orange rolls like a slow tide, and the air becomes a wall that punches men off their feet. Hoses whip out of hands. Fuel lines jump. For a terrible second, nothing moves, and then everything does. Flames lick upward along vent pipes and ripple across a sheet of oil, spreading with malicious grace. The destroyer alongside, light and taut, throws her head up and slams down, a bow bent and ribs aching. A coxswain, stunned and bleeding from the ear, swears he can taste copper in the air. Across the roadstead, near Queen Elizabeth's turn of the bilge, the second mountain learns humility. Marseille and Shergat's warhead, clinging like a lamprey, makes its own sun in the gloom. The explosion is deep, deeper than men measuring with words can say, and it forces a body that believed itself invulnerable to kneel. Bulkheads groan. A turbine room becomes a well. Pumps thrash and catch. The ship settles by the stern, slowly, a queen in reluctant curtsy until her keel kisses soft silt. On the flagship's bridge, a hand goes automatically to the telegraph. Useless reflex. Habit stronger than physics. There is no single sound for a harbor cracking open. It is a crowd of them. Klaxons and bells. The squeal of metal. Men's voices climbing the scale from command to plea. Over it all, the steady, mightily controlled language of damage control tries to carve order from panic. Shut that watertight door. No, not that one, the next frame. Plug the split with shoring. Rig the portable pump. Get that man off the ladder. If you can't keep your feet, you'll drown the next. And there is always the sea itself, implacable, pressing its advantage through every rivet seam that time or stress had widened a hair. In the stark-lit compartment where Della Penne and Bianchi wait, an overhead light bursts and the room coughs dust. A seam beads with moisture and then writes in running script down the bulkhead, small letters of water, then words. The door flies open. Marines, eyes blown open to saucers, rush to drag the prisoners up, out, anywhere but here. No one bothers with dignity. They careen through passages now alive with men and shouted bearings and the rectangular thunder of hatches slamming into their dogs. The ship pitches not like a vessel underway, but like a cathedral whose foundations have shifted. On Valiant's upper deck, the captain's face is stone. He listens to reports. Boiler room flooding, port shaft space taking water, list negligible but stern sinking through the tide mark, dockyard parties already signaling intent. Anchors are paid out to hold position, fires are localized, hoses breathe. It is a clinic in discipline, the art of a crew bending, not breaking, around its wound. And yet, every man who glances over the side and sees the harbor's waterline, now much too high against the armor belt, knows what it means. The ship is settling. Pride has a taste, and this is the bitter part of it. Signals jump the harbor like sparks blown forward of the Sagona fire. From destroyers to the harbor master, from patrol craft to the base staff, a net of words tries to keep pace with events. Underwater attack suspected. Charges believed attached. All ships set condition Z. Nets are checked. Pattern patrols redrawn in frantic pencil. Somewhere at a radio desk, a petty officer writes "human torpedoes" into a log and underlines it twice, as if punctuation could stitch shut a wound. On Queen Elizabeth, men in the after compartments find themselves suddenly closer to the bottom than to the sky. Ladders lead upward forever. In the dim pump room, a chief petty officer with grease tattooed into the lines of his hands slaps a youngster's shoulder. "Keep the suction clear, or she'll bloody drown us," he says. And the words are mundane enough to stitch one boy's mind back together. Hoses flop and thrash like caught eels, then settle into steady labor, water shoving through them in solid ropes. Back aboard Valiant, the captain takes in the scene with a calm that has nothing to do with inattention. He is making a ledger in his head. Compartments lost, buoyancy remaining, time until she kisses bottom. He knows already that kissing bottom is not the same as dying. Not today, not here. The harbor is shallow. The ship will settle upright, not roll if they are careful. Masts and guns will stand above the water like the bones of a whale. Pride will suffer. The fight will go on. Near the inner mole, a launch bucking little chop shoulders through smoke. On her way to the oiler, sailors in singed shirts haul lines, swing axes into fouled hawsers, cut the destroyer free before the fire can weld ship to pier. The Sagona's deck belches smoke in slow, muscular pulses, like a beast catching its breath to roar again. The launch coxswain ducks a gout of flame and brings his boat's nose where it needs to be. Men move. That is the whole story of war sometimes. Men moving through fear to do the necessary. And under it all, far below the reach of shouts and hoses, the harbor floor receives what the charges demanded. Queen Elizabeth and Valiant settle, dignified despite the insult, their hulls resting on mud they were never meant to touch. The shock of it travels farther than the wave, into signal rooms, into a headquarters where an admiral stares at a clock and understands, into minds that had assumed safety at anchor as a law of nature. When the tremors subside, the human sounds return. Boots, orders, coughs, a man muttering a prayer so old it might be habit. In a passageway, a Marine with burned hands hands a tin mug of tea to an Italian prisoner who has just helped carry a hose. For a beat, there is nothing but breath and steam. Then the captain of Valiant steps to the rail and looks across at the other battleship, her stern lower than it should be, and he nods once. He understands what has been done, and, against all instinct, he respects those who did it. Morning grows teeth. Smoke frets the wind across Alexandria's basins, smudging the neat geometry of masts and cranes into a charcoal map of surprise. In the workshop-scented belly of HMS Valiant, the sea has been herded into obedience. Confined behind doors, lashed down with timbers, bullied by pumps, the ship sits on the mud, upright but humbled, an iron cathedral with its foundations suddenly visible to God. Across the harbor, Queen Elizabeth's stern is too low. Her deck's an unintended terrace for gulls who don't know the difference between pride and physics. And in the middle distance, the oiler's Sagona still breathes black, while a destroyer that is torn free of her flaming hip limps away with scorched paint and a heartbeat like a rabbit's. On Valiant's quarterdeck, the captain, Charles Morgan, wears the look of a man who has memorized two ledgers at once, damage and grace. He has already seen the Italians again, stripped of their nightmare suits, shoulders square, eyes rimmed red from salt and tiredness. They answered rank, name, number. They offered neither apology nor gloat. When Della Pen said, "There is a charge under your ship," he did it with the flat decency of a sailor asking another to step aside from a swinging hawser. It is not something you forget. By mid-morning, the harbor answers with its own kind of discipline. divers in bell helmets clanking down ladders, dockyard cranes pivoting with bird-like precision, signal flags biting in a changed breeze. The Admiralty in Cairo and the Commander-in-Chief in Alexandria, Admiral Andrew Cunningham, the silver-haired hawk of the Mediterranean, demand facts over confused ether. Are the battleships lost? Is the fleet still a fleet? The answer is a study in verbs: damaged, settled, contained, afloat in spirit, if not in draft. Cunningham's subsequent orders carry the pinch of urgency and the cool of a mountain stream. The damage is not to be advertised. The Axis will learn soon enough. Let aerial reconnaissance find two queens apparently in commission, their yards manned, their signals alive, their crews drilling as if nothing but routine has visited them. And so a theater begins. Men are billeted aboard the battleships to keep ritual alive for the cameras that may peep from the high blue. Boats shuttle tirelessly, bearing fresh uniforms and stores to maintain a fiction as tangible as the hoses underfoot. Signal lamps chatter in rehearsed rhythms. A band even plays on one afternoon, soft marches that wash across water like a prayer for dignity, because sometimes the difference between defeat and delay is measured in how convincingly you hold your posture while the mud grips your keel. In the sickbay, burns are dressed, concussions noted, the tally of the night's sudden arithmetic written with careful hands. Miraculously, there has been no monstrous butcher's bill. The charges did their work like sculptors, knocking the legs out from under giants rather than tearing torsos open for the sake of spectacle. Men are alive to write letters. There are thanks for that, quiet and private. There are also oaths, quiet and private, about human torpedoes and the sort of men who ride them. Sailors swear tenderly. It keeps them from breaking. Below, in a compartment that smells of iodine and naval soap, Penne and Bianchi sit across from a lieutenant with a notebook. Around the table orbit the residues of the night, two rebreathers stacked like coiled animals. A length of line with its end charred, a knife whose edge has tasted paint and weed and fear. The British officer does not ask the wrong questions. He asks the right ones with a tone that has earned its softness. How deep? How far? When did you learn? The answers are contained by duty, but the silence between words says enough for a professional eye. Months of training in La Spezia pools, countless drills with magnets and clockwork, engineers learning to love a machine that fought them, courage that arriving in enemy hands cannot make pretend. News moves through stone and steel like cold. Scirè, the submarine that birthed the riders, has ghosted away. Patrol craft slashed the night after the first shock, but Borghesi's boat had already faded, a rumor pressed into deep water. In a bureau ashore, a British intelligence officer spreads sketches of the SLC across a desk and tries to reverse engineer respect into advantage. What nets will catch a man who can unhook nets? What hearing will detect a motor trained to be the sea? Near noon, an RAF reconnaissance Spitfire comes in low and tilts a wing over the outer roadstead. The pilot glances down and reports what every photograph will later show. Two battleships apparently composed, flags making polite conversation with the wind, dockyard motion disciplined and banal. From far Libya to Malta to London, messages go out that the Eastern Mediterranean fleet is bruised but still at its post. No easy feast for an enemy with too many hungers and not enough knife. In Italy, word is not yet public, but in certain rooms, a silence spreads that feels like joy, held in cupped hands. Decima MAS, the frogmen of the 10th, have done what they were laughed at for attempting. Maiali, scoffers had said. A carnival stunt. In a headquarters at La Spezia, someone allows himself a very small smile and then returns to work, because work, not smiles, is how you make the impossible familiar. Back on Valiant, afternoon light slants across a deck that remembers being new. Captain Morgan walks forward and pauses by the break of the forecastle. He looks down into water that tells no truths at this hour. He thinks of the men who came on the water like ghosts and placed a hand at his ship's throat, yet offered him a warning rather than a boast. Sailors know metals and weights and angles. They also know men. Courage, however it is applied, wears the same face. He orders that the Italian prisoners be fed and given dry clothes. He orders that their equipment be cataloged, not mocked. He reminds his first lieutenant, in a voice with no ornament, that they will one day tell this story to a young midshipman, and that he wants the telling to be accurate, not only for the sake of the fleet's pride, but for the sake of whatever man, somewhere, is even now inventing the next impossible thing. As the sun steepens toward late day, Queen Elizabeth and Valiant sit like great beasts at rest, breathing evenly at last, their backs against invisible pillows of mud. The harbor's noises become ordinary again, hammers, winches, voices. But under every sound, a new bass note has joined, the recognition that anchorages are no sanctuaries, that the war has learned to slip under gates and past certainties, that the quietest approach may be the most violent truth. And out beyond the breakwater, where the water darkens to the color of ink, a submarine runs deep. The captain's hands light on a periscope he may not raise for hours. In his log, he writes only what the sea will tolerate: position, course, speed, fuel, a phrase about special operation completed. In a margin he doesn't write the faces of 6 men in black rubber, grinning with chipped teeth, the stink of battery acid still in their noses, and the knowledge, already heavy, that victory earned underwater rarely floats back to the surface with the same name it wore below. Night returns with the soft authority of a door closing, and with it the feeling that everything important in this war has moved half an inch further into the dark. Alexandria settles into repair. Pumps do their endless arithmetic. Divers tap Morse on hulls with wrenches. Carpenters shore frames with timber that still smells like forest. In offices where maps are nailed to walls with pins like wounds, admirals and captains draw new lines. Outer booms doubled, inner nets tightened, patrol tracks rewired, listening devices requested from men who swear they can hear a battery think. For the British, the reckoning is stern but not annihilating. HMS Valiant will be brought back. Months of patching and refit, but back. HMS Queen Elizabeth will go farther, to American yards where engines are replaced and scars turned into seams. The fleet is not gone. It is bruised into caution. Yet the real wound is conceptual. Anchorages had been thought of as resting places, the pause between gambles, the breath before the next dive. On 19th of December 1941, a handful of frogmen taught that the breath itself can be stolen. For the Italians of Decima MAS, there is a different turning. Luigi Durand, Penne and Emilio Bianchi, now prisoners with the curious status of craftsmen admired by the very men they have injured, walk the deck under escort and, in moments of borrowed politeness, are given cigarettes. Penne inhales, exhales, glances across at Queen Elizabeth, and, for the first time since La Spezia, allows himself to imagine what the armistice might look like if it ever came. Men like him and Captain Morgan on the same side of a line, nodding without needing to agree on everything. It is not sentiment. It is a sailor's algebra, balances, vectors, a sense of where things will inevitably go if you push here instead of there. Years later, and you can show this in the Mind cinema, even as 1941 cools on your tongue, Penne will wear a different uniform alongside the Allies after Italy's 1943 armistice, leading men against former partners of convenience. He will receive Italy's Medaglia d'Oro al Valor Militare, the gold medal for military valor, for a night when he rode a machine named Pig, like a knight rides a stubborn horse into a dragon's shadow. Captain, later Admiral, Charles Morgan will speak well of him. Respect keeps strange company in war, but true sailors know the code that weather writes on a man. Cunningham's communiques in the weeks that follow are laconic by design. The Eastern Mediterranean Fleet continues operations. The Axis does not pounce with the confidence a wrecked fleet would have invited. Aerial reconnaissance photographs show masts straight. Signal flags articulate, decks busy, ships alive in posture if not in draft. The deception buys time. Time for welders and divers, for tinsmiths and draftsmen, for plates to meet plates with a kiss of sparks. Time in war is blood with a clock. Across the broader sea, the lesson travels. In Taranto, Pearl Harbor, and now Alexandria, the new gospel is etched in oil and fire. Power is vulnerable at rest. The battlefield is three-dimensional. Initiative belongs to the innovator. Human torpedo teams proliferate and mutate. Neger and martyr craft on German slips. British charioteers scheming their own intrusions. Japanese chiton bending the idea into tragedy. Each nation stares at the same problem and sees a different shape to cut. But the Decima MAS raid on Alexandria keeps its special voltage in the war's tapestry because of the way it felt. Quiet men in black, climbing under pride and gently placing a hand over its heart. The equipment list is prosaic. Oxygen rebreathers, magnet clamps, hydrostatic pistols, clockwork timers that, if you listen closely, tick like the second hand in a dead room. The effect is operatic. 2 battleships bent into silence without a battle line drawn, without a gun fired in anger above the waterline. In the months that follow, as Valiant is patched and Queen Elizabeth makes her long pilgrimage to an American yard, sailors will tell the story with the practical love they have for a good yarn. A Marine will insist he could smell cordite before the blast. A signalman will swear he saw a fin slip beneath the surface that was no sharks. A coxswain will claim he looked an Italian in the eye and saw a man who had already made his peace. The details will shift in retelling as details do. The spine will not. On a winter night, 6 men made a harbor doubt itself. If you stand now in your mind's harbor and feel the wind across your cheeks, you can hear the future pressing its claim. The distant thrum of diesel is always there, somewhere beyond the boom, somewhere beyond the comfort of lights. The sea does not respect the names you give to safe places. It respects the work you do to defend them, and it respects audacity equally. Watch the waterline, walk the nets at night, check your valves twice. Be ready to be surprised by what looks like a toy until it is under your ribs setting a clock. And remember this, the laughter that greeted the human torpedo was real. Mockery is the cheapest insurance in any war, the first premium paid by men who hope the world will stay ordinary. That night in Alexandria, the premium came due. The men who brought the bill climbed out of the sea without bubbles and carried a shape that looked ridiculous until steel learned its language. When the harbor lifted, so did an idea, one that would haunt every anchorage from that hour to the end. At dusk on the second day, after fires have been bullied into ash and hoses have fallen silent, and men have slept in odd places with their boots still on, Captain Morgan walks past a sentry who straightens until his spine clicks. The captain pauses at the rail, glances toward Queen Elizabeth, then down into the water. Somewhere below, magnets still cling to scars. Somewhere inside, pumps purr like cats. He touches the brim of his cap to no one in particular. It is not a salute to victory or defeat. It is to the craft of the sea, and to those who, for a few breathless hours, mastered it in a way that made giants kneel.